Whew, feels good to be back. What's up everyone, it's Ozzy from OzTalksHW, and instead of studying for finals, I decided to do a little bit more Ryzen CPU testing. This time though, I have the R5-1600X, the mainstream 6-core 12-threaded AMD CPU, as opposed to the 8-core CPUs that I tested earlier on this channel. The inspiration behind the testing was pretty simple. First things first, and I'm sure many of you noticed this too, I noticed that Ryzen chips were not as utilized as much as their Intel counterparts in computer games. For instance, in GTA 5, the i7-7700K CPU usage bounces around 90%, while the R7 CPUs have anywhere between 40 and 70% usage in that particular game. At first, I thought this could be because of the extra cores on the R7 CPU, which allows the load to be shared more equally across each of the CPU cores. But it actually turns out that this trend continues down to lower SKUs. Even on the R5-1400, which is only 4 cores and 8 threads, it still has less CPU usage than the i7-7700K. Of course, this is not true for every game, and the trend seems to decrease with newer titles, such as Ghost Recon Wildlands, for example, but for a majority, the Ryzen lineup has some breathing room, actually quite a bit of breathing room. Unfortunately though, the only real solution to this issue, and I use issue lightly because this may or may not be an issue, but it could just be the way that the Zen architecture actually runs its workloads, is to wait for possible game and Windows updates to improve performance and stability. This basically means that the user has to sit back and wait patiently for the developers to take charge and fix this, again, issue in quotations. But while that happens, or in case it does not happen, you can definitely take advantage of Ryzen's multi-core power. Now, according to the polls that I took on Linus Tech Tips and on Twitter, it turns out that the majority of PC gamers do not strictly play their video game when gaming. Generally speaking, they have some dedicated application running in the background, and by dedicated, I simply mean not your standard operating system resources. For example, 30% of gamers have a web browser open in the background. Another 27% have an online chatting software such as Discord running, and about 40% have either a hardware monitoring software such as Afterburner and/or a music streaming program such as Spotify open. It definitely differs depending on the player, but according to my Linus Tech Tips poll, 95% of players have some kind of application running in the background whenever they're gaming. Knowing this, I tested a scenario with typical background applications running while gaming on the Ryzen R5, and I recorded the performance hit on the Ryzen CPU and compared it to the performance hit on the Core i5 series. Now, my tests are pretty vanilla because my resources are pretty limited and I didn't have too much time to test it out, but it does give me a decent idea and trend of how Ryzen performs when it comes to multitasking and gaming. The processors tested were the R5-1600X and the i5-6600K, both at stock frequencies while using 16 gigabytes of DDR4 memory running at 2133 megahertz. I did not use higher speed memory because I actually had a friend, Osa from Tech Dynasty, do most of the i5 testing for me. As a result, I used stock 2133 megahertz RAM speed for simplicity's sake. Big shout out to Osa, by the way, because he really did help out with this video a ton, and a lot of this wouldn't be possible without him. So if you know him, then send him your thanks, and if you don't know him, go check out his channel and show him some love as well. The games I tested were Watchdogs 2 at high settings before the recent update, and Grand Theft Auto 5 at very high settings. Both were tested at 1080p. When benchmarking Grand Theft Auto 5 and Watchdogs 2 without any background applications, the two CPUs were pretty close to one another. In GTA 5, the i5 has a noticeable lead over the 1600X in average frame rates and an even bigger lead in minimum frame rates. This is nothing new, of course, as Intel chips run better in Grand Theft Auto because the engine loves very strong cores, and right now Intel CPUs have a higher average IPC. In Watchdogs 2, the R5-1600X has a 5% win in both average frame rates and minimums. Keep in mind that I am benchmarking Watchdogs 2 before the update that provides a performance boost to Intel processors, so I imagine the gap would close if I ran this test again today. Regardless, keep these scores in mind and then watch what happens when a typical workload is added to the picture. Based on my Linus Tech Tips and Twitter polls, I decided to leave Spotify open and a playlist running in the background. I opened Discord with a voice chat running, and I opened 6 Google Chrome tabs of typical web pages: Facebook, Twitch, Reddit, YouTube, Gmail, and Twitter. Having these applications open simulates casual multitasking experience that, According to my poll, 95% of gamers experience when gaming. I ran the benchmarks again, and here are the results. In GTA 5, the scene takes a big turn. The R5 1600X, which was effectively tied before, is now in the lead by 6% and effectively battles the i5 6600K in minimum frame rates. When comparing this benchmark run with the previous one that did not include background applications, the R5 loses 6.7% of its original performance on average, while the i5 loses about 10% on average. The biggest difference shown is in the minimums. The i5 loses 25% of its minimum frame rates, while the R5 only loses 9%. The 1600X shows a similar trend in its performance dip in Watchdogs 2. It drops from 70 FPS to 67 and loses about 5% of its original performance. The minimums take a large dip, going from 52.6 to 44.4, an 18% decrease. The 6600K follows suit from GTA 5 with a 9% performance dip in its average FPS and a 24% decrease in minimum frame rates. Now, I cannot make a consensus whether or not the R5 1600X is a better gaming and multitasking CPU because I only tested 2 games, and that's pretty vanilla for such a steadfast conclusion. But based on the performance hit compared to the i5 6600K, the amount of cores and the multi-threaded application power, as well as the CPU core usage, it seems like all the arrows point in that direction. What we do know though, based on the games that I've tested, is that the R5 and the i5 take about a 5 to 10 performance hit on average whenever you have any kind of casual applications running in the background of your games. It seems that the i5 does take a bigger hit on average compared to the R5 though. So does this mean anything for Ryzen CPU usage issue that we might have at hand? Possibly. Although the R5 did have a lower performance hit when it came to multitasking and gaming, you also have to keep in mind that the R5 has 2 extra cores, hyperthreading, is pretty much a multi-core monster, and both of the games that I tested really do take advantage of extra cores. This means that the extra cores are probably the reason why the R5 did better than the i5 when it came to gaming and multitasking. Now that's not very interesting, as most people could come to that conclusion without doing any kind of test at all. More interestingly though, the CPU usage on the R5 1600X did not noticeably change when I tested GTA 5 and Watchdogs 2 with the background applications running. This may mean that certain games can only use X amount of Ryzen's resources and no more. Whether this is an architectural design strength or flaw, a latency issue, or the game optimization issue is still pretty unsure. It could also be that the R5 CPU did not break a sweat with the 3 applications I had running in the background. I'm definitely going to push the CPU to its limits to test game playability while heavily multitasking. It probably won't be very realistic, but it could give us a better idea of what this all means, and it'll be kind of fun. So that's it for this video, guys. If you enjoyed it, then leave a like, and if you loved it, subscribe, because I have more content like this coming out in the future. Now, I know a lot of you are probably wondering who won the 1700X giveaway. Well, 11,000 entries later, 11,000, that's insane. 11,000 entries later, the winner ends up being Micah I can't pronounce it, I'm really bad with names. But Micah from Slovakia, you won the 1700X. I already sent you an email and you already replied, so you will be getting that 1700X pretty soon. But thank you guys for watching, and thank you to everyone who submitted their entry into the giveaway. I really appreciate it. Until next time, I'll see you guys later. I got nothing to compare with you. You say